Well, good morning. We all know that the Upper Peninsula is a wonderful place, although at times it can be a weird place as well. And now there's a book to prove it. This morning we'll talk with the author of that book, and it starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, our guest this morning has spent many years exploring and writing about Michigan. Her latest work is called Upper Peninsula, A Guide to the Weird, Wonderful, and Obscure. Her name is Kath Usatilla, and we're pleased she could join us this morning. Kath, welcome to The Ryan Report.
Thank you.
Nice
Good
to have you with us. You know, you describe yourself as a bi-peninsular Michiganian. Tell us what that means.
Well, yes, my parents were both born in the UP, in Copper Country. But my mom grew up in Detroit. My dad was growing up in Kearsarge. So we were raised in Detroit, my family. But we always visited relatives, both in Copper Country and the Mid-Peninsula farming community, Rock.
Okay.
And I just loved it. So we spent a lot of time back and forth and finally built a house on Lake Michigan about 15, 16 years ago, and now live here full time.
Oh, you live here now full time?
In Auburnway.
But you grew up as a Detroit girl. What was
I
that?
grew up in Detroit,
That
yeah.
had to be in Detroit's heyday, too, unlike now. I'm not trying to
Well,
make you
no,
ancient.
and Detroit's come back so much. Actually,
Right.
I went to the University of Detroit, lived in the city, worked for the Metro Detroit Convention and Visitors Bureau. That's how I got into tourism and travel. And I met a lot of travel writers through my job promoting the city back in the
Right.
in around 1980s and that whole Detroit Renaissance era. And so I loved the idea of becoming a travel writer. So I eventually left my job promoting the city and then started writing about travel.
What kind of things were you doing to promote Detroit at that time?
Well, that was an exciting time because when I was at the convention, we brought in the Republican Convention for 1980.
Okay.
And then 2 years later, Super Bowl 16. So we had these big major international events to deal with, and there was a lot of hope that things were going to really take off at that time. But then we went into a slump. But now, of course, Detroit is
Coming back.
enjoying a revival. Yeah.
And I know that you actually got your start in the tourism business by reading a little bit about the fact that you worked at a small inn when you were going to college.
The Botsford Inn was the
Botsford Inn.
1836 stagecoach stop on the way between Detroit and Lansing. And so, yeah, I worked at the front desk, and there was a fireplace there to tend, and the desk that we worked behind was actually used by Abraham Lincoln.
Really?
He was a lawyer in Illinois. And, well, Henry Ford owned it at one time,
Really?
the inn. So he brought a lot of things into the inn. It was very historic and charming. And, yeah, so I really got into the travel.
And what attracted you most from that experience to bring you into the travel and tourism business?
Well, it was just the adventure and meeting people from all over the place. And my first job, as I said, was at the Convention Bureau, where I got to use a lot of my communication skills in different promotional programs and brochures and videos and advertising. And so it was a really fun, exciting time. And then, as I said, meeting the travel writers and saying, oh, maybe I could do that, and pull everything together.
And as far as your personal history, again, your grandparents, like many of us, came from overseas, as they say.
Finland, and yeah, they came off, and they settled in the UP.
Okay.
And so, yeah, we had deep Finnish roots. I still have cousins in Marquette and Hancock and Calumet and Escanaba. Yeah.
I don't know if you know, but this station had a Finland Calling show
I
for
know.
over 50 years. So
Yes,
it
he was
amazing.
quite the legend.
Yes.
My grandma was on his show, actually. My mom and grandma
Oh, is that right?
were on Suomi Kutsu.
So after you left the Convention and Visitors Bureau, what kind of things were you doing now? What kind of writing? Who were you writing for?
Oh, that was when there were a lot more print publications to write for. So I would write for a lot of different airline magazines. Mostly I started writing about other places I traveled to, but I ended up focusing on Michigan and Detroit. I just always was involved in Michigan tourism through my job.
Right.
And of course, I told you I loved the UP growing up, so it was just something I decided to focus on. And all kinds of newspapers from Florida to, I can't even remember all the publications now, but that was back in the late 1980s and into the 90s, and then magazines and newspapers travel sections started to shrivel up. So
okay, let's talk about the book, and this is the book. It's The Upper Peninsula: A Guide to the Weird, Wonderful, and Obscure. So what was the inspiration for this book?
Well, the publisher that I work with is based in Missouri, Reedy Press, and they've done a series of books about cities all over the country. And I proposed, why not do one of these books about the Upper Peninsula? So it was really early in they had not done regional books, so they weren't quite sure how it was going to work out, but it's proved to be pretty successful. It's actually my third book for them. And I said, well, if any place has weird and wonderful and obscure things to discover, it's the UP. So there are books like that there's one on Detroit, and there's different city books similar to that.
Okay, the others have written.
In this series.
One of the amazing things as I looked at it is it describes roughly 200 places or events. And did you actually visit them all?
Well, there are most of them. Yes,
Okay.
I still have to get to Isle Royal.
Okay.
But I had to include it because it's so special and unique.
Right.
And what I focus on in this book is the wolf and moose study that's been going on Isle Royal. But yeah, most of those and a lot of them I knew from years of
Right.
traveling and studying and researching. Some of them I dedicate this book to our son, Graham, because he just knows all of these obscure facts, and some of them I got from him. Information, and some of them I learned about as I was researching something else.
Sure.
So
We'll talk about a few more excerpts from the book
Yeah.
in just a couple of minutes.
Okay.
We'll be back with more on today's show after we take this 2-minute break. Our guest this morning is Kath Usatello. She's written this book. It's called Upper Peninsula: A Guide to the Weird, Wonderful, and Obscure. A lot of interesting stories and places and events from the UP, and we're going to just talk about a few. And I'm not going to ask you to give me all the details because people have to get the book to do
Okay.
that. But
Good
just to give them kind of an example, I know you write about the time that a former president came here just to sue a local Ishpeming newspaper editor.
Yes.
Tell us about that a
Yes,
little
I
bit.
call that fake news circa 1913. Teddy Roosevelt was upset that he had been portrayed as a drunkard and this terrible person, and that was not at all. Apparently he rarely drank, and he felt he had been libeled, and he decided he had been president, so I guess he was looking for something to do. He also had a friend up here, George Shiraz in Marquette was a friend of his, so he would come up here other times and spend time hunting, and so he decided to bring a lawsuit against this publisher because he didn't want this to happen to anyone else, to be portrayed this way in the media. So it became quite a circus, a 3-ring circus. He brought us entourage with him, and national media were here following the story, and he regaled people with stories of his adventures. It seemed like, from what I read, he was just having a good old time with this trial. And then after, I don't know, about 5 days, I think the publisher said, okay, I was wrong. And he threw in the towel, and Roosevelt won, and supposedly he asked for the smallest settlement, which was 6 cents, the price of a good newspaper, and this guy's paper was 3 cents, so he slapped him down that way. But I included that because you can go to the Marquette, the county courthouse where it took place, and so throughout the book I tried to, everything has a connection of something you can actually visit or eat, some of the UP foods, historical markers, and so on. So you can either read about the places, or you can actually go and visit the sites connected to
and
the
if people
stories.
want more detail, they can read the book.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, you also had one that people can wear today that make a difference, and that is the famed Stormy Cromer hat. And time.
Yes, and if you haven't done the free tour, have you gone
I
to
have, no.
Ironwood? And
Although I have talked to Bob Jackward.
yeah, he's shaking things up there, he and his daughters. And
Right.
it's a fun tour where you get to see this actually handmade, literally hands-on production. So that's, and you can get a picture, a selfie with the world's largest Stormy Kromer hat.
And you can learn in the book how it actually started.
Yeah.
And actually it was Bob Jackward who rescued it in later
He
years.
did, and it was a real quick turnaround that he started to, and now of course it's internationally known.
Right, he's done a marvelous job there. You also talk about one of my favorite places, which is the Big Springs at Kitchity Kippy, and really tell the story of how, except for one individual, we might not have the wonderful place we have today.
Yes, yes, he really, this merchant, local merchant, just loved visiting there, and he really inspired the sale of the property so that the state could make it into a park for everybody to enjoy.
And you know, I probably get there at least once a year, and I've never been there when there aren't at least 50 or 100 people any time of the year.
Yes, did you do the raft?
Oh yes, definitely, yeah, yeah. You know, it kind of reminds me too that there probably are other wonderful attractions like this that perhaps have been overlooked over the years.
Yeah, some of them are really beautiful, some are really eerie, some are very rare geological formations.
Right.
So this is what we're trying to expose.
Well,
in
and
this.
speaking of weird, there's the Paulding Light. Is it a ghost or gas? What do you think?
Well, you know, it's what you want to believe it is. That's what I've deduced.
Right, okay. And your book isn't a recipe book, but you do mention some foods, including Trinary toast and how that came to be. It's pretty famous stuff, isn't it?
Yes, it's been decades, just a handful of owners, and the new owners are a young couple, and they're really taking it to the next level. This is the crunchy, everybody probably has had it since they've been in this listening area, has had it since they were born. But it's getting distributed far beyond the UP now.
Right.
They've really taken the marketing to the next level.
We have only a couple of seconds left in this segment, but you also say that the first roadside park in the country is in Iron County.
Yes, there's a little table there, a marker, and there was somebody who had been traveling around in the dawn of the automobile travel and said, hey, wouldn't it be a good idea to have a place for people to pull over and rest, and that's how it was born.
Okay. We'll have some other information from our new book and some other things, and we continue our conversation just 2 minutes from now. Our guest this morning is Kath Usatello. She's an author. She's written a book called Upper Peninsula, A Guide to the Weird, Wonderful, and Obscure. And if you're looking for a Christmas gift, this would be a good idea, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. It's at Snowbound Books and Touch of Finland. And
on the internet.
Yeah,
And
internet.
You can wrap it up or fit it in the sock. And a lot of things you can do with it. It's really very interesting. I picked out a few of my favorite things. Is there anything else, any other real favorites of yours that you like to talk about?
Oh, only 89 of them.
Well, okay.
There's some sweet stories. There's stories about historical figures. There's, like I mentioned, some really weird landscapes that you can explore. And
Right.
yeah, so try to cover a little bit of a variety of things.
You've written a couple of other books. One is called 100 Things to Do on the Upper Peninsula Before You Die, and the other is 100 Things to Do on Mackinac Island Before You Die. In this one about the Upper Peninsula, what's the difference between this and the newest book?
Well, this is divided into sections of very specific, say, businesses, places to shop, like Getz's. That's
Okay.
such a great store. It's got a history. Actually, of course, since Marquette is the center, there's several. Beth Milner is in there because of her unique jewelry. And then there's also a food section. There's recreation. So it's divided into the very specific things to see and do. And the same with Mackinac Island, where you can find and experience some interesting historical sites and so on. My new book expands, of course, it covers some of those same topics, but it's more about the stories. Like I said, if you just want to read about it, great. If you want to take it on the road and see it, great also.
Speaking of Mackinac Island, it's also a favorite place of mine to visit. Would you agree that it's probably fair to say that most people only scratch the surface when it comes to exploring Mackinac Island?
Yes, and that I address right in the front of that book. I'm trying to get people to, day trips are great to Mackinac Island, but spend one night. It's such a different place when you spend the night, when the last ferry leaves, and then you wake up in the morning before the ferries get there. And you can do it affordably. You can get on some email lists and get some deals to stay at Mackinac Island overnight. It's a whole different experience. It gives you time to get away from the main street, get into the middle of the island, or even just spend some time, extra time at the fort or the other museums. The art museum there is really special. So yeah, I think more people should spend a little bit more time than a day trip allows.
And some people may not fully appreciate the real history that there is there. In fact, it goes back before this country was founded.
Yes, the Native American history. In fact, there's a new series of kiosks that go on the circle route around the island that talk about the Native American history.
Are there some attractions on the island that you especially would like to recommend?
Well, I think if you're not staying overnight at the Grand Hotel, some people say, oh, do I really want to spend $10 just to go in and see and, you know,
Right.
sit on the porch? And I talk about that, especially in this new book, about the history and the way that hotel was built in 6 months, mostly in the winter,
Right.
if you can imagine, in 1887. And at one time there were 1,200 of those hotels. Now there's only a dozen of these big old wooden resort hotels. And it's just, if you just are able to spend some time, even if you're not an overnight guest, and just absorb that history and thinking about what it's been like for the last 100+ years, you know. So that is a special thing. I think everybody should just spend a little bit of money, $10, walk through, sit on the porch, have an ice cream, and really appreciate the history.
You know, tourism has become a huge industry in the UP. And with your background both in writing and in tourism, do you think we could do more to promote things we should be doing to promote the UP?
Well, the Pure Michigan campaign has been, it's just turned things around and made such an international impression. That campaign has really helped the industry. When you talk to almost any business connected to tourism, or even just that tourists might visit a restaurant or that didn't have that kind of opportunity for exposure before Pure Michigan. So
Right.
I think that's really important to continue that at the level it has developed to.
And I know the one thing that some people are working on is to promote the UP as a whole, not just some of the attractions.
Yes,
that
yes.
come up here and there's a lot you can see and do.
Well, and a lot of people don't realize how big it is, how long it takes to get from the bridge to,
Right.
you know, Copper Harbor. They
Okay.
have no concept of the sprawl of how big the territory is.
We have only a few seconds left. Any other books in your future?
Oh, not at the moment.
Okay. Just ignore it. Just
yeah,
enjoy
yeah,
it.
Yeah, 3 in a row over the one each year. I'm thinking about it.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for coming in this morning and sharing the story behind the books. We
This has
appreciate
been
it very
fun.
much. It was good to get to meet you.
Yes. Nice.
Okay. We'll be back with some other thoughts for you in just a couple of minutes. Well, the countdown to Christmas is now really heading into the home stretch. It seems like we've been encouraged to get at our Christmas shopping for at least a couple of months now. The much hyped Black Friday sales, which are typically on the day after Thanksgiving, seem to start in October this year. Apparently the major retailers were concerned because the calendar this season provided one less weekend for shopping between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and that's why, they explain, the big push started earlier. Although the truth is it seems to start earlier every year, no matter what the calendar says. While there are many wonderful things about the Christmas season, when it comes to gifts and shopping, I can't help but recall a couple of memories from the past. Some of you may remember a song from many years ago by Yogi Jorgensen, who sang with his Swedish accent, "Oh, I used go nuts at Christmas. On that jolly holiday, I'll go in the red like a knucklehead, 'cause I'll squander all my pay." I think Yogi had it right. But enough grumbling about the season today. Let me instead share another memory from the past. You know, when I was a kid, we didn't have Walmart or Target or any of the big discount stores that are so popular today. We also didn't have Amazon because the internet hadn't been invented yet, which is probably just as well because we didn't have home computers either. Most of the businesses were owned by local store owners, which meant that even though we had some very nice stores, the selection was nothing like it is now. That was especially true of things for kids because there weren't that many places selling toys. Now, I grew up in Ishpeming, but I imagine other UP cities were pretty much the same. I remember we had the dime store, which is what many people called Woolworths in those days, but even their selection of things for kids was limited. There was also Gilmore Jenkins' store, and if I'm remembering it right, and strange as it might seem, his business was a combination greenhouse and toy store. But there just weren't that many places with a big selection of the latest toys. That's why what happened as the Christmas season approached was so exciting, as two other stores would feature their annual Christmas Toyland. One of the stores was Jackson Hardware, the other was the Qual & Qual Furniture Store. Just in time for holiday shopping, they would open the Toyland on the second floor of their stores. A visit to either store could put a smile on any kid's face. Everywhere you looked, there was nothing but toys, an amazing display of every toy imaginable. Besides the toys, the entire area was brightly adorned with Christmas lights and decorations. It probably wouldn't seem like much today, but back then, it was like walking into a kid's wonderland. You know, today we have stores that offer far more toys than we ever had back then, but there's no one, at least around here, offering the same magical feeling a kid could get when their parents took them to visit the Christmas Toyland many years ago. I'll be back in a minute. Time for us to wrap it up for another week. Remember, the latest news anytime is available if you check it out at uppermichigansource.com. You can also watch this show at that same address. Thanks to Kath Usatello for joining us this morning to tell us about her new book about the Upper Peninsula. And thank you for being here. Hope we can get together again next Sunday morning.